I'm feeling good about this. It's Sunday morning. Don't really have anything to do today but write and enjoy not dying a couple days ago. So somebody drank my beer, so I'm gonna have a Mike's Hard Lemonade and keep going. A partner of mine asked last week, what is the difference between telling my story to a camera and going to therapy? And basically, it's when you're in therapy, you're only telling the traumatic stories. And you're just focusing on the most painful parts of your life, and you're telling those stories over and over and over again. Except for in EMDR, where you are intentionally processing that trauma, I haven't found that to be useful. I find it to be more traumatizing. I usually come out of a therapy session in a panic attack or very close to a panic attack because I have just spent the last hour telling very horrible parts of my life. And because of the healthcare system in America, where it's very difficult to find a therapist and stick with that therapist for years, I have to do it over and over and over again. Every time I can find a new therapist, I have to start the fuck all over again. And it's not extremely helpful. So telling the whole story of my life and giving it context, I'm finding it to be actually a very healing process. There's a lot of healing going on in my life right now. So I recommend this. If you have a traumatic story, if you've had a traumatic life, to do this. Now, don't just tell the bad parts of it. Tell the story of your life. It makes me feel good that my whole shtick here is magic and mental health, and I'm doing that right now as I'm trying to give the context of the message, because the context is my life. I don't have a degree in psychology. It's just my life is the foundation of my argument that spirituality and spiritual health and mental health are the same thing. So that's a big reason why I'm doing this, not only for the few loved ones out there that I care, but maybe there's somebody else where my life story will help them, but mostly because telling the story of my life and how I have changed who I am is the whole foundation for the message that I'm putting out. So I kind of have to do this. And I didn't want to when I started, but now that I'm in it, it's very healing. And there's been a lot of healing that has happened in the weeks since I started doing this. Not all of it fun. Healing is often painful. So I want to just keep trucking and get through this because, we're catching up to where I am now. And I want to get back to the message, not just talking about my life constantly. So joined the military in June of 2000. Get to San Antonio, Texas. I get off the plane and I can't breathe. It's so humid. It's hot because it's also a desert, but fuck is it humid. And I grew up in a very dry, arid environment. I can't goddamn breathe. So we're doing boot camp in the fucking middle of summer. It is so hot and so humid. And they have this thing. It's like some kind of the wet bulb. I don't really understand what that means. They didn't explain the science to us. Where if the heat and humidity hits a certain point, they're supposed to stop training for the day. Training was not stopped for the day one single time while I was in boot camp. And Air Force boot camp isn't. It's probably, besides Navy boot camp, it's probably, I know it's easier than Army boot camp and far easier than Marine boot camp, but no boot camp is a walk in the fucking park. And one of the reasons why I never wanted to join the military, I didn't join when I was 18. I didn't join until I felt like I had very little choice between just living a life of poverty and joining the military, is that I don't like being told what to do. And I grew up getting screamed at, and I did not want to get screamed at. However, the funny thing is that because I had grown up getting screamed at and beat, I didn't, like, boot camp was nothing to me. You know, it was just like, make your bed, okay. You know, fold your clothes this way. All right. You know, it was the drill instructor would get in my face and yell at me, and I was like, well, you're not going to hit me, so it's whatever. Some other guys in there just couldn't handle it. They would like literally fell apart, and a couple of them didn't make it through boot camp because they couldn't handle getting screamed at. And that's fair, you know, getting screamed at right today, right now, I have a very hard time getting screamed at, but back then I was used to it. Um, and I was like, when you first go into boot camp, they go by age, and then they go by height of who's going to be the leader of your boot camp flight. And I was not the oldest, but the oldest dude made it. You know, I was like 20. I was in my mid 20s. Memory issues. Let me try to figure out how old I was when I went in. 24, I think. Um, and the oldest guy didn't make it as the uh, flight leader for very long, so then it was me. And God, that was fucking stressful. I was very happy when I got fired from that job and somebody else took it over, and then the whole rest of the because I was flight leader, the drill instructor let me choose my chore, and I chose laundry because now we're like several weeks into boot camp and I'm seeing what's going on and analyzing the whole thing. So I'm in there doing laundry 3 hours a day where nobody's fucking with me. So boot camp was not that hard. Um, the only time I really cried in boot camp was when we went to chapel one day and we had it was Father's Day, and they said all the fathers stand up, and this is my first Father's Day as a father. I had just become a father right before I went into the military to provide a better life for my family, and so I'm missing my first Father's Day because I'm at boot camp. And let me tell you, when my first child was born, that's the day I grew up. The moment when I'm watching the birth, and at that moment when I first see them, that's when I realize I need to get my shit together. I need to grow up. I'm a dad now. I am responsible for other people. And that was part of my decision in joining the military. But, you know, missing my first Father's Day because I'm in the military, that's the only time I cried. Um, and then I told my recruiter, this is the year 2000 when computers are, if you want to make good money, get into the computers. So I told him I wanted to be a programmer. This is before programming was outsourced, you know, to every other country on earth, where if you got a certification or a degree in programming, you were pretty much guaranteed a great job. And so I wanted to do anything computers, but preferably programming. So he's like, "How would you like to program avionics computers?" And I said, I don't care, as long as I'm learning programming." So he signs me up to be an avionics technician. And if you were also a pointy head, you know that there's no fucking programming involved in that job. I went through all the boot camp, all through tech school, technical training, and I was at my first base before I asked my sergeant, "When do I start learning programming?" And he took literally a VCR tape. That's how old the computers on this plane are. It's like a VCR tape, but it's made out of metal. And he puts it in there, and that's the program. It reprograms the avionics flight computer. And he's like, "There, you just programmed a computer." And I'm like, "Oh, you motherfuckers, I got." And I was so angry about that for so long. So tech school was a year, and it was a year or 2 years. No, it was a year. And because it was a year, it was considered a permanent change of station, so I can move my family out with me while I was in tech school. So I went to tech school in Biloxi, Mississippi. And I'm going to go through several, like, there's so much to cover in these 10 years. I might be jumping around a lot. So this is when I start getting wild, and I've been through so much. I have a lot of anger issues. I start drinking. I start womanizing. I'm a not living a healthy life, but I'm a big guy and I'm a party animal. So like nobody's calling me on my bullshit. I'm fun to be around. And um, swinging is big in the military lifestyle. So me and my wife started getting into that, and just you know, bunch of crazy. I don't like telling those stories because a lot of people, especially guys, look at my sexual exploitations and they think I'm some kind of hero. I'm very sex positive, but a lot of the crazy sexual shit I did was not when I was in a good, healthy state of mind. Um, I was addicted to sex, and it's not something that I want to be admired for. Um, I get through tech school, go to my first base at Travis Air Force Base. I'm working on the C5 Galaxy as an avionics technician, which it involves another 2 years of training once you get to your first base. So it's like 3 total years of training, three and some change, before you're a fully qualified craftsman mechanic. And so I'm just barely there when 9/11 happens. And I was again working gray shift, and I get home from work, go to bed, and my wife comes and gets me and says, "I think you need to come see the TV." And I'm like, "I'll see it, I'll look at the news when I get up. I'm tired." And she comes up a bit later and she's like, "They're saying they're shutting all the airports down." And I'm like, "Oh, good. Maybe I won't have to go to work tonight." I'm so tired and I'm just trying to get to sleep. And then she comes up for a third time and says, "I really think you need to get out of bed and watch this." So I stumble out of bed and came downstairs, living on base housing, right before I watched the second plane hit the tower. And I just stand there in shock for a while, and I'm crying. And then I just go and get dressed and go to work. And that's the only time in my military career I ever saw them not have to do a recall. A recall is when they call everybody back to the base or back to your duty station. Everybody just showed up. And I didn't see my family very much, for like 6 fucking years after that. Either we were working 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, or we were deployed. Um, and I had my second child during that time. I'm still in training. I'm not a fully qualified mechanic, but we find within weeks of 9/11 that the Air Force doesn't deploy like the Army does. When the Army deploys, the entire unit deploys. The Air Force, especially for mechanic squadrons, there's C5s all over the place. The planes are cargo cargo planes are picking up equipment, dropping off equipment, picking up people, dropping off people. They're all over the place. So you need to have some mechanics here, some mechanics there, some there's mechanics are scattered around at forward operating bases and support bases. So we didn't all deploy at the same time, and plus we are the home base. When the planes are seriously damaged, they come back to our base to get repaired. And so there has to be people here, and the people. So about half the squadron is deployed. It's scattered all over the world within weeks of 9/11, and this the government still didn't really have a clear idea of what was going on, but we went into high alert mode anyway. And I remember standing outside a C5 in the middle of the night with a flashlight and a radio because we were waiting for Al Qaeda to attack us. That was the level of paranoia that was going on, because it really had very little idea what was going on, and we hadn't declared war yet. So it was just us chickens. It was just like the most experienced mechanics were all deployed, and it was like senior airmen, which is E3, E4, and below, were running the fucking flight line. And so that was like several things happened. First of all, I got hurt a lot. Um, I'm a big guy. A lot of jobs that are two people jobs, three people jobs. There are not two people or three people. There's me. So I'm picking things up and pushing things, pulling things that I shouldn't be. But because I'm fucking John Wayne, I think I can handle it. I don't wait and ask for help. I don't. There is nobody to help. So I'm just doing it. And man, I had like my first two back injuries, like that first year. Um, but I'm a big guy, and because of trauma, I am used to ignoring my body and pushing through it. I've already been through 3 years where I didn't hardly sleep. You know, I'm big, I'm strong, I'm young, I'm stupid, so I'm just keep going and keep going and keep going and keep getting fucking hurt. Um, but also because there wasn't a lot of experienced sergeants around, they were all deployed. I latched onto this civilian who'd been working there since the C5 was fucking built, and he had done an entire career in the Air Force, 20 years, retired, and came back to work the next day with the same job as a civilian, being a C5 avionics technician. And this motherfucker knew more about that plane probably than anybody on the planet. And he taught me so much that within a couple years, when I became sergeant, I found myself as lead tech running the entire fucking avionics section of the squadron because I had latched on to this. Like when I first picked up my toolbox and just went out on the plane with him, he was like, "What the fuck are you doing?" And he's like, and I was like, "I was just lying." I was like, "I was assigned to you." He's like, "I don't need no fucking puppy dogs. Get the fuck out of here. You weren't assigned to me." And I was like, "Yes, sir, I was." He's like, "Who assigned you?" I was like, "I did." and and at first I just hung around him like he would just ignore me, and he was a gruff, grumpy motherfucker. But eventually he started teaching me, and fuck, he taught me so much about that plane. And he told me, like he says, like there's 88 different avionics systems. You're not going to learn all of it. Become an expert at one or two things, and I did. And that's all it took to be good at my job. But also in boot camp, see, I'm gonna have to go back and forth because there's so much shit here. In boot camp, I'm fresh out of church, right? And I've done a little bit of reading about Wicca before, and I've been doing a lot of studying about religion in general and the history of religion. But I had had very little contact with actual pagans at that point in time in my life. So I go to boot camp, and one guy on one side on the bunk, one side of me is a pagan, and then the other bunk on the other side of me is a Satanist. And he explained to me one time, he's like, "Well, I'm not a Satanist. I worship Set, but most people don't know what that is, so I just call myself a Satanist." And I remember right before we finished boot camp, I couldn't find my wedding ring, and he had stolen my wedding ring, and he came up to me like in the middle of the fucking night, and he said, "Here, I cast a spell on this for you," and just I want you to take it back. And I was just like, "Fucking what?" I didn't know anything about magic at that point in time, and this freaked me out. I was like, "What the?" I was like, "Okay, thank you," and I threw the little ring away. Um, but he was trying really hard to get me to go to the pagan like church service every Sunday because we could have like a timeout and you can go to chapel on Sunday where you don't have to deal with somebody screaming at you for a couple hours. And like I don't know why, because like today I am a pagan, and pagans don't really recruit. We don't proselytize, and I don't know why he was trying so hard with me. But I did go with him one Sunday just to get him off my back, and I found it to be kind of boring because it was a chaplain who was not a pagan but was just open minded did the service, and it was just it wasn't anything special. It was just kind of boring. But I'm starting to get introduced to that side of it. He gave me a book to read. I read the book. The other guy also gave me a book to read. Read both of them. And then I get to my first duty station, which is in California, not that far away from the Bay Area, and all of a sudden I'm working with a bunch of pagans, and and they're that's when I really started to get into it and started. I did go to a few pagan meetups around that time, but like I always found these people to be really bizarrely weird, and now I am a bizarrely weird person myself. But I just couldn't handle the level of fucking weirdness, so I didn't really get much into the pagan community. But that's when I started reading seriously and never stopped studying religion, never stopped studying about the history of religion. And somewhere in there, I'm not exactly sure when, but I had probably been in the military for a couple years. I want to say I was about 26 years old before I was like, okay, I'm a pagan, you know. And part of that was reading um, so much about the history of religion, which, like I said before, goes into mythology pretty quickly, and realizing that every culture, basically before the Industrial Revolution, before the Enlightenment, believed in magic. Now, I had grown up as a Christian, being held up that Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, David, Elijah, Solomon, Ezekiel, Daniel, like all these men of God are heroes. So I never had this idea that our ancestors were idiots, which seems to be the basic scientific thesis that despite lasting evidence of advanced cultures um, throughout the world, that for some reason our ancestors were all utter fucking morons before we invented the steam engine and the scientific method. And so a lot of scientists to this day just utterly dismiss any kind of spirituality, magic, because the Egyptians talked a lot about magic. Well, they must have all been idiots, morons, despite the fact that they built the pyramids. Like that was just, well, that must have been aliens because people that believe in magic could not have done that. It's a bunch of insulting shit. Like we can't figure out how the pyramids were built to this day, but we still feel like our ancestors were morons. So I never really had that thought because I was raised to have a respect for the cultures that came before us that gave us what we have today. So I'm not reading these old stories and just automatically dismissing them. And when I realized that there's correlations all throughout the world, throughout history, everybody believes in some version of an elf and a gnome, and everybody sees lights out in the forest at night all over the world from the beginning of time, and everybody believes in magic. So I tried it one time and it worked, and it scared the utter living fucking shit out of me. I remember thinking that this is like having a nuclear bomb in your pocket, and I didn't do magic again for like several years after that because it utterly terrified me that magic is real. Um, so let me skip back to the professional part of my life. So I am an avionics tech, and then the first time I deploy, because I had to be fully trained. That's again the difference between the Army. I've known lots of people in the Army that just barely got out of boot camp and deployed immediately. That happened to my best friend, and my best friend growing up, he doesn't talk to me anymore um, because of religion. Um, and several people I've known out. Some people I've known even got pulled out of boot camp early in order to deploy because the unit that they were going to be assigned to was deploying. That does not happen in the Air Force. In the Air Force, you don't get deployed until you're fully qualified in your job as at least a journeyman, which is their way of, these are apprentice journeyman craftsmen. Um, so I had to go through all the training first and do all the classes and get fully signed off on my job before I could deploy. And I never deployed to. I've never been in combat. You know, when I say I have PTSD, a lot of people assume that I'm a combatant. I was not. Um, so my first deployment, because at that time they called it, there was TDY, temporary duty assignment, was when you went to a non-combat area. A deployment was when you went to a combat area. But retroactively, they said anybody that went anywhere in support of Operation Enduring Freedom is a combatant. So they gave us all medals, you know, and that's, I don't know why the military did that, but I never was never in a combat zone. I was around sometimes. There was times later on that I would go to like really quick when I was the lead tech, and it was my job to fix planes that broke down all over the world. Um, Sometimes I'd be like I've been to like Spain and Italy and shit, but only for a couple days, and I never left the airbase. I was only on the flight line, and I just flew in, fixed the plane, and left. You know, but I there was a couple places I was where I was like I would hear fighting and shoot, you know, over here in the distance, but I was never around. I was never in danger, you know. So my first duty station was to Rhein-Main Air Base in Germany. I was there twice for 6 months at a time, and and again, part of my education, part of de um, programming myself is seeing this other. You know, America's the best country on earth. Go literally anywhere else, and you will see if it's not better, at least it's different. And the way we do things is not the only way to do them. And Germany is so fucking beautiful, and it was so clean, and it was so safe. And now I'm well into my partying time, and I'm like, we got to Germany, threw our bags in our rooms, and went out drinking immediately, and didn't get back to, like, we got back to base in time to throw our uniforms on and go to work. And so we're downtown at the red light district, and that's the red light district is not just all whorehouses. It's the red light district is the party place. You know, where the clubs, the bars, there's restaurants that are open all night, and yes, prostitution is legal in Germany, so there are brothels there, but everything is neat and clean and safe. There's cops everywhere, and they're not there to beat you. They're just there to keep everything safe. And it's like, keep all the partying right here in this part of town. When you're outside, you know, then be quiet and respectful, but you can party here. Just keep it here and be safe. So there's plenty of times in Germany when I would be like completely drunk out of my mind at 2 o'clock in the morning, stumbling around the red light district, and never felt unsafe for a single fucking second. And that was great. I mean, we were working hard, but also, this is right when Vice City came out, the video game, and so a lot of guys would just stay in the dorms and drink or play cards or play video games all day long. When I got a day off work, I would get the fuck out and see Germany. I was like, when am I ever going to be in a foreign country again? So I saw some really amazing things. A a garden where there was like little biodomes, and each biodome was a completely different climate. And I saw castles, and um, I was drinking a lot, so I would just go to pubs and just drink with people and talk. And a lot of people in Germany speak English, and picking up women, because that's what I did at that time in my life. And but one of the greatest stories was I was just I got on the train and I got lost. It's pretty easy, you know. You're in the signs are in German, and there's not as many signs in Germany as there is in America. So I ended up at the end of the trains that, like, it just stopped, and they were like, "We're just gonna be here for a couple hours." So I get off the train, and we're in a little tiny small fucking town. I have no idea where we were, and they were having carnival. And I literally got off the train. I walked down to the town, and there's just one main street in this little tiny town, but it looks like it's all like medieval time buildings and medieval era. And in the somebody just fucking hands me a big fucking tankard of beer, and another person just hands me a bratwurst. And I'm just like, And I'm just walking around town, everybody's singing and dancing and playing music. And then, like at midnight, they started playing. These are all like German folk songs, and everybody's singing and dancing along. And then all of a sudden, It's Raining Men comes on. And it was just like the whole town is singing in English. It's raining men while they're just drinking and dancing. It was like, it was fucking bizarre, but it was a great time. And and before I left for deployment, I had already seen, because I had to go through training before I deployed. So we'd already gone through several deployment cycles. By now we're officially at war, and I'd already seen these guys leave and their wives. And it's not all men, but I mean, just typically it's still like 70% men in the military. And when I was in, and so I see their wives just disappear, and then 6 months later, when the guys come home, all of a sudden their wives pop back up in the social circles and shit. And some of them that I talked to were just like really massively depressed and just kept to themselves. And I'm like, that's got to be fucking stressful. You know, there are support systems at the base. Keep talking to your friends, keep talking to your husband's friends, keep talking to the first sergeant, as the person who takes care of personal problems in the squadron. Um, you know, and so when I deployed, I told my wife, don't don't just sit around at home being sad for 6 months that I'm gone. Keep up your social life. Keep talking to your friends. Keep in with the squadron social activities and the wives club and all that stuff. You know, like don't just sit here while I'm gone and let it get into your head and be depressed. You know, and she took that a little too seriously. So she started hanging out with this wild chick that also lived in base housing with us, just like a couple blocks away from our house, and started doing meth. And I did not know this. I have never been around drugs. I grew up in a very sheltered environment. So I get back home, and my wife's personality has completely changed. And now she's like neglecting our children. She's out all night. She's not responding. You know, we're starting to get into arguments. I'm starting to yell. I'm angry because I'm working 12 hours a day, and I can't depend on my wife to be home when I need to be at work and be taking care of my kids. And I'm worried that all of a sudden she's just spaced out and being neglectful. Is like, how are my children safe? You know, and also all of a sudden I'm really fucking stressed out, and I'm not handling it well. I'm having a lot of fucking anger issues. And my sergeant basically orders me to go to counseling. So I do 6 weeks of therapy, um, where all I do is just tell my life story up until that point in time. And then the therapist got it extended for 6 more weeks. And she said at the end of 12 weeks of telling all the fucking horrible shit that's happened to me, a lot of that I'm just skipping over, and I'm not going to tell every single time I was beat and all this shit. She said, well, you have every right to have anger issues. And I was like, well, yeah, I know that, but that's not helpful to me. I want to not have anger issues. So that's when I really started to be like, all right, I did the therapy thing that y'all told me to do, and it did no good. Um, so one day, um, my wife get up in the morning. Now I'm no longer on grave shift. I'm on regular day shift. I get up in the morning. I'm getting everything ready. I have 2 kids at this point in time, and I'm ready to go. I need to leave. Like, you're not late for work when you're in the military. It's not a thing that happens. And my wife's not home, and she told me that she was hanging out with her girlfriend, but like, she should have. It's 8 o'clock in the fucking morning. She should be home. And I call her. She's not answering her phone. I call her best friend, and she said, I haven't seen Monica in 2 weeks. Okay, so she's lying to me. So the car pulls up. She stumbles into the house in disarray, wearing an outfit that I bought her for her birthday. Um, and I'm like, I'm livid. I'm like, where the fuck have you been? And she picks up like this crystal salt shaker, the heavy, you know, heavy ones, and she throws it at me, but I just move to the side and it goes past me and it fucking hits one of my kids. And I'm just like, okay, no. Like, call my sergeant. Sorry, family emergency. You can't come to work right now. And that was the end of our marriage. I did not know at that time that she was doing drugs. I didn't find that out until later when I ran into her, the friend that she was hanging out with, and her friend told me that they were hanging out at parties doing meth and shit. And so you think I had issues before? Holy fucking shit! That was like the second really deep, long period of depression. I was drinking every fucking day. Um, you know, and I was what they call a functional alcoholic, and that's not something to brag about. I would go to work, come home, grab my kids from the babysitters, um, and I'm a sergeant by now. Am I a sergeant? No, I'm not a sergeant. I'm a senior airman. And fix them dinner, play with them, give them a bath, put them to bed, and then just drink. And just drink until I pass the fuck out. And then wake up in the morning and do it all over again. There's plenty of times I went to work hungover. Um, I was angry. I was a mess. Um, and I'm also just being very irresponsible with sex, just fucking anything that I can, left and right. And this one woman that I just had like a fling with gets pregnant. So I move her in with me and I marry her because God bless America, there's no such thing as universal health care. The only way I can pay for my child to be born is to marry her so she's covered under my insurance. And how I don't hear that conversation often enough about universal health care. How many abusive situations are created and sustained because there's not universal health care. A woman has to be with a man, or a man has to be with a woman, or somebody has to be with somebody, has to be in a bad, horrible relationship in order to pay for a child or something like that, or just to have health insurance. That's abusive. And that is the worst 5 years of my life. My marriage to this woman. She was an alcoholic. She was a drug addict. She was very violent. But, like, she would hit me. One time she hit me in the head she was drunk. She hit me in the head with a wrench. I called the police. The police wanted to arrest me because that's just the prejudice, right? That's just like, if you're the guy, you're the one doing the abusing. You know, it's your fault. So there's plenty of times that, like, I had to leave the house or whatever. And so I know what it's like to be in an abusive situation and not know how to get out of it, because what is worse, watching the trauma of my two children and the trauma that they went through when I was separated from my first wife and we got divorced. And I had custody of them because she just disappeared and went off into drug land somewhere. So I'm raising my sons, and I'm in the military, and I'm going to college. And on the weekends I'm going to college using my tuition assistance to get my degree. And I saw the trauma that was caused to them by their mother abandoning them. Because even after we divorced, they're still in like custody and shit, but she just disappeared. I had no idea where she was when she went. She just disappeared. I didn't even know she was alive until I came back to California. And so not knowing like what is worse, to be in this situation with this person who is an alcoholic and a drug addict, or to kick her out of the house and go have my kids go through that trauma all over again, that abandonment trauma. I didn't know what the right thing to do was, and I waited too long to make the decision. And I was under the impression that my second wife was only being abusive towards me. I did not know that she was also being abusive towards my children until years later when they were old enough to tell me the stories. So there's a lot of guilt that I've had to process and deal with that, as is having my children in that situation. Um, so if you're out there and you're in that, I know what that's like. It was just a fucking nightmare, and because I couldn't deploy at this point in time because my life is a fucking wreck. So the military put me in charge of an environmental program, and I'm still a senior airman. So I'm the second. There's one guy whose wife is going through cancer. Me, whose my life is just a fucking mess. So the California EPA decided that military bases could no longer just pay a big fine and get away with polluting. They had to comply with the laws of it. So there was no fucking environmental program in the Air Force at that time. Nobody, every military base would just pay a fine, like as polluting permit, and and so all of a sudden we have to comply with all these rules and regulations from EPA, OSHA, from the fire department, all these different organizations, and there's no function. It doesn't exist. There's no regulations. There's no handbooks. There's no manuals. There's no nothing. So we're just in this. A sergeant and me just get put into this program, and we knew right from the get-go that we were the fall guys, because we were at that point in time, because our personal lives were a mess, we weren't our commanders and our sergeants weren't very happy with us. So when the EPA, they told us the EPA is going to inspect you in a year, and we knew, like, they didn't expect us to fix it. We were just gonna take the fall when the inspection came back as a fucking wreck. But we weren't happy with that, so we sat down and we just read regulations for weeks, and we created this program from scratch, and we had to fight for every fucking resource, everything. But when they did that EPA inspection, we had zero discrepancies. And I don't know if you've ever gone through an EPA inspection before, but that's a big thing. So then they reassigned him, and the second year I was put in charge of it. And then from there I went back to the flight line, and I was the lead technician, so I was running the avionics section. But then I got hurt. I was out in the middle of the night, and I'd already been hurt several times, and there was a couple more car accidents while I was on duty in the military. Because you're driving, you deploy, you're driving materials and equipment and shit around, and we're all working hard, and we're undermanned because Bush was fighting a war on two different fronts and wanted to slash funding and manning to the military while he's fighting a war. That's the craziest fucking thing I've ever seen in my life. Well, crazy up until that point in time. And so accidents happen and people get hurt, and I had friends die, and I had people, I got hurt, and I saw some people get hurt really bad. I've seen a couple of people just die right in front of me just from industrial accidents. Some good friends died. A lot of people got hurt permanently. I'm one of them. So I'm out on the flight line in the middle of the night, smoking a cigarette, waiting for a part to be delivered to me, and I'm wearing my fucking reflective shit and everything like I'm supposed to be. And the next thing I woke up in the emergency room, and the fucking truck, it's like these little, like a bread truck, right? It's a little delivery truck that's supposed to be coming out and delivering my part to me. Fucking ran into me. And I'm like right in the middle of the flight line waiting for this motherfucker, and they found out, I believe they found out later, he was drinking. I never saw him again. But the military just gave me some Vicodin and Flexerol and gave me 3 days off work and sent me back to work. I didn't find out until a couple years ago when I pulled my military records and applied for disability that my back was broken, and they knew it, and they never told me. It was fractured, and I've been in constant pain ever since that day. That happened in 2004, and I have been in pain 24 hours a day since then. So when it came time, my first tour was up, and I couldn't deploy, and the military was also giving half of their C5s to the National Guard, so where there was not as much of a need for C5 mechanics, so they retrained me into training. And So now I'm a trainer, and I was very good at it, and I got my bachelor's degree in training. I liked it so much, and I transferred to Colorado, so I'm back in Colorado. And as soon as we moved from California to Colorado, my second wife just, like, the drinking and drug use just got out of control. It's common for people to go through a little bit of depression when they move. It's a difficult thing to move. But I mean, it was just a fucking nightmare. I had to take 30 days off work to put her through therapy twice, and I was just lucky that I was, first of all, good at my job, and was had good relationships with my commander and my chief, that I was allowed to do those things. Um, so I'm trying to keep, I had aspirations of being in the military for 20 years and retiring. Initially I wanted to go and become an officer, but when I was doing the hazmat job, I had one asthma attack that I attributed to being around these chemicals, but they were like, no, you can't deploy. You are permanently disqualified from deploying, which means I was disqualified from going to officer training school. Nowadays, you can cut a limb off and they'll slap a new limb off you and send you back out. But at that time, it was like one asthma attack, and I could never deploy again. And that also really limited my career growth. But but I was good at my job, and I was a very good trainer. I basically revamped the training program for a lot of different units at that base that I was assigned to. But I'm also having severe um, personal issues, that my wife is an alcoholic. I'm an alcoholic. I'm not violent like she is. She's like attacking me, but I'm so fucking depressed, and I'm drinking, and I'm throwing my dick around everywhere, and not, I'm not here teaching spirituality, because I've always been a good person. I have not, and I've hurt people, and I was an asshole for a long time. And and again, I try therapy, and again, it doesn't really have an effect. Doesn't really do anything. Doesn't improve my situation in life. So um, it's funny because in the military, you're only supposed to have sex with your spouse. Everything else is infidelity. Even though swinging is huge in the military, it's nobody talks about it. It's very quiet. Um, and I was in the military when we went from Bush to Obama, and Obama made it right before. When I was in, it was still don't ask, don't tell. Right after I left the military, Obama said you can serve openly as a queer person. You can serve openly in the military. But when I was in, it was still don't ask, don't tell. So a lot of the sexual misconduct can get you in trouble or even kicked out. And I was fucking everything I could fuck. It was just one of my ways of unhealthy ways of dealing with my depression and my mental health issues. And but I got in trouble for the one person that I did not have sex with. This one girl threw herself at me, and I almost did, but I did not. But she went back to work and told everybody that we had sex, and I was, uh, and even though she had done that to the same thing to like three other people, I still had, at that time I was a sergeant, so it was like, okay, I was working directly for the commander, and I was like, they were like, you're not in a position where you can do shit like this. So I got investigated and everything, and it was difficult. And eventually I was, like, nothing happened to me except for a letter of reprimand, which would have been thrown out of my file in a couple years, as long as I kept that was the only time I got in trouble in the military. I was always, I did well in the military. And I had a pretty good career, but that was the only time I got in trouble. But right after that happened, my 10 years was up, and I realized, like, I can't deploy again. I'm just going to be stuck in this office job for another 10 years. I just went through this really embarrassing thing of being investigated, and felt like that was limiting, that was going to, like, I was not going to get promoted for a couple years because of that. And I just didn't want to do this anymore. So I got out of the military, and somebody offered me a job. I was had written several different training programs for different organizations within the military, and had a lot of these involved coordinating with civilian organizations and training programs and colleges and businesses to create these training programs and all this stuff. And I as a training manager, I was not expected to train. I was the manager, but I liked training, so I would do a lot of the training myself. And somebody heard something, I don't know, and I got offered a job as $100 an hour as a training consultant, as in the business training consultant. And this all happened at the same time, so I'm like, fuck yeah, fuck the military. Even though I did well, I never enjoyed the strict, rigid structure. It was all performative. I was putting on a mask the entire fucking time. I could never relax. I could never be myself. I had to keep all the weird shit in my life quiet. I couldn't go around telling everybody I'm a pagan, telling everybody I do magic, telling everybody that I'm a swinger. You know, I couldn't. Everything had to be hush hush, and it was stressful. And plus, my wife is an alcoholic. I had to, like, you don't let your craziness of your life affect your career in the military. You do not do that. So much of my life was, there was this schism, and it was stressing me out, and I hated it, and I was depressed. So I got out. This business really tried, and I normally tell people the recession hit, but this is the real story since I'm telling the story, because it's embarrassing. Um, Part of the job involved sales, and I have succeeded at every job I've ever had except for when it comes to sales. I cannot sell. I think it's because I grew up poor, and I cannot ask people for money. I can't do it. But you went out with this business, you went out and created training programs for companies, but first you had to sell your services to them, and that involved cold calling. And oh my god, I am terrified of phones. So the goddamn vice president of the company coached me, and I still couldn't do it. And then the recession hit, and it's like people talk about the recession as if it all happened at one time, but it really didn't. It happened in waves. First, it was the housing market fell out, but then various various segments of the economy got hit. It was like domino effect, and the whole segments of the economy would just collapse, and there would be like no jobs. And so I'm a trainer, but if nobody is hiring anybody, there's no need to train anybody. So it went from, I'm going to make $100 an hour, or easily, I had friends that were trainers that got out of the military that were making $100,000 a year, to where I can't find a job at all. After a couple months, I'm applying for jobs at Taco Bell, and there's nothing. And so I have this abusive wife who is an alcoholic, a nightmare situation at home. I have some money saved up, but we're running through it rapidly, paying the bills with no income coming in. So I pull out my guitar, and I've been playing guitar since I was a kid, but it was just for me. It was just my personal therapy. And but it's the only fucking skill that I had, because there's no, like, 9/11 pretty much killed the aircraft mechanic, like, people that used to make really good livings as an aircraft mechanic. In the years after 9/11, aircraft mechanics, they busted the union, and they were making minimum wage. Nobody needs a trainer, because there's nobody getting hired. So again, I've gone through several career changes in my life, but I went into the military to get a skill set, and I got two of them. I went into the military to get a degree, and I got a degree, but I still can't find a job. And I'm so just utterly fucking depressed and anxious and scared that I need my family's existence is on the line here. So I pull out my guitar and I start going to open mic nights, and I find myself within a matter of months just, playing just here and there for like $100 a night, $200 a night, $300 a night. And after 2 years of doing this, it got to the point where I was making about $500 a night, and I was like, oh shit, I'm going to be able to make a living as a musician. And it was wonderful. Being on stage was one of the happiest things for me. Um, it was just this, like, I was a different person on stage, and all my anxiety and depression went away. But I'm still fucking drinking, and I'm still got this complete and utter mess at home. Now I don't have health insurance with the military to put my wife through rehab when she falls off and starts drinking again. So she starts drinking for a third time. Maybe I wasn't clear on that. She would get into a period of time, went drinking heavily, being all this fucking nightmare. Put her through rehab. Things would calm down somewhat. She'd start drinking again. So this is the third time, but now I don't have insurance, so there's really nothing I could do about it. I mean, I tried, and um, but when you're a musician, you're mostly out. It's a late job, right? Because you're out there playing, and then if you're smart, when you're done playing, you're gonna stick around and talk to people, because being a musician is all about who you know and networking. So you're gonna talk to the people who came out to hear you play. You're gonna talk to the bar owners. You're gonna talk to the bartenders, the people that you need, the bar managers. You need to be in good with people who can get you gigs, and people are gonna come out and hear you play. So if you play, you should be out talking to people until the goddamn bar closes. So it's a late job. So I wake up about 10 o'clock in the morning, and nobody's in the house. And I didn't really think anything of it. It's just, my wife took the kids somewhere. Um, Maybe to the park, to the store. I don't know. I'm not really that worried about it. And all of a sudden, my two oldest children walk inside the apartment, and they're all sweaty and hot and shit. And I'm like, where are you guys coming from? Where's mom? And they're like, mom passed out. We walked home. And I'm like, what the fuck? So I throw on some clothes. She's got the only car. I sold one of my cars to pay my rent. So she's got the only fucking car. So we walk about a mile or so to this gas station, and my wife is stone fucking drunk inside the gas station. And I go inside the gas station, and the guy says, she driving all crazy, pulled in the gas station. My car is parked like half in and half out of the goddamn parking lot of the gas station. She said she got out, fell out of the car, threw up all over the place, stumbled in here, threw up all over the place. And he said, I just called the police, and the police are on their way. And I was like, okay. So I went back out, got my kids back in the car. Now my youngest kid is in the fucking car. Like, my oldest kids couldn't carry him, so he's just in the car in the fucking parking lot this whole goddamn time. So I get my kids, get in the car, drive back to my apartment, shitty apartment in a bad part of town again, in the projects this time. This time I'm living in the projects myself. And we pack up all our shit and leave, and come back to California again, staying with my parents' house. Now I'm in my fucking 30s. I've lost everything that I have twice. I have lost now 4 different careers, and I'm living with my parents again in my 30s with 3 kids. Yep. And now I think we're getting close. Maybe another one or two of these, and we'll be caught up.